All right, ladies and gentlemen, today is your introduction to dividing fractions. You do not need to have this memorized. You're only supposed to be introduced to it in fifth grade, so don't stress if this is a little confusing for you. That's the last thing I want. So let's go with our I can statement. I can divide whole numbers by unit fractions and unit fractions by whole numbers. You're going to see both of those in this video. So we'll kind of walk through this together. And again, don't feel overwhelmed. There's a pretty simple strategy I'm going to teach you, but it may take you a little bit of practice to understand it, okay? So we're just going to start by looking right now at some fractional shares. So this whole page is about waffles. So looking at problem number one here, it says suppose there are 5 people and 4 waffles. Well, if they only had 1 waffle to share between 5 people and we had to divide it into 5 equal pieces, then they'd each get a fifth of a waffle. Not a lot of food, but they still get a fifth of a waffle. Well, the same rule applies here if we've got 4 waffles. So we have 4 waffles, 5 people. Well, they can't all have a whole waffle because there's not enough waffles for that. So they're going to end up getting 4/5 of the waffle for each person that's there. So if we take a look at this equation, we're going to think way back. When we talked about dividing whole numbers, we said that was the exact same thing in this case as multiplying by a unit fraction. So it would be 4 times 1/5. This is kind of going way back for us, all right? So that would equal 4/5. So now we got 10 people and 7 waffles. Well, if there were 10 people in 1 waffle, boy, the portions of waffles are getting really small here, we would have 1/10 of a waffle. If we're talking about 7 waffles altogether, then they're going to be 7/10 of the waffle. And again, the same equation is going to work like we did up at the top. We got 7 waffles. We're going to multiply that times 1/10, which equals 7/10. Now, you think about 2, we got 4 divided by 5 and 7 divided by 10. If you remember when we're talking about that fraction, that line in the fraction means divided by. So this is 4 divided by 5. This is 7 divided by 10. That's what that line means when we talk about fractions. So let's look at another way to think about this. And this is a pretty straightforward method, but we're going to talk a little bit about it, okay? It is called keep, change, flip. And this is how this works. When we're multiplying or when we're dividing fractions, the rules say that we keep whatever number comes first. And if that's a whole number, it works the same way. Then we change division, as you can see here, to multiplication. And then we flip the fraction, or if it's a whole number, we have to put a whole number with a numerator of 1, all right? So in this case, for this example, it'd be 1/2 times, and now we turned 1/6 into 6/1. That would be 6 divided by 2, or 6/2, which would end up being 3 if that was the answer for this one. So let's take a look at that in action. We've got 4 divided by 1/4. So we would take 4 and put it over 1. That's how we do with whole numbers with fractions, as you recall. Changing division into multiplication right here. And then we've got 1/4 flips into 4/1, which equals 16/1, which equals 16. So what that means is if I had 4 1-foot boards and I wanted to take 1/4 of each of them, I'd have 16 pieces by the time I got done cutting that up. All right? So take a look at the next one. 1 divided by 4 equals 1 divided by 4/1. Because remember, all I did here was put this into fraction form first, so I remembered what it looked like as a fraction, so I don't forget to flip this. I've got 1/4. Now I changed division to multiplication, and I changed 1/4. I flipped it upside down. 4 is now my denominator, 1's my numerator, which would equal 1/16. So if we go back to our waffles example, if I had 1/4 of a waffle and I had to divide that between 4 people, they'd each get a 16th overall of the original waffle that I had. Not the 1/4, but a whole waffle, okay? So down here, we're going to take a look at this. We got 3 times 1/10 equals 3/10. Now the only thing missing here is we don't have it over 1, but all we did is we changed division to multiplication, and we turned 10 into 1/10. We flipped it upside down. You're going to see the same thing for these as we go along. So again, 4 times 3. We flipped it upside down. Remember, this would be 4/1. This would be 3/1. 4 times 3 would be 12. And it would be 12/1 if we were going to run that all the way out, just like I'm showing you over here on the right. So that equals 12/1, which equals 12. That's how that's expanded out. Now, The last one down here, we have 1/2, and we're taking half. So think about food again. If I'm going to have half a waffle, half a cake, or whatever, and I'm going to split that into 5 equal pieces, okay, that's going to end up being 1/10 because I flipped my 5, which would be 5 over 1, into 1/5, just like it shows over here on the right. So 1/2 divided by 5 is the same as saying 1/2 divided by 5 over 1, which equals 1/2. I changed my division to multiplication, and I've got 1/5 right here. Okay, so that gives me 1/10. Keep, change, flip. Keep the first number exactly as it is, whether it's a whole number or a fraction. If it is a whole number, you're going to want to remember to put a 1 underneath it so you can multiply straight across. All right, so let's take a look at this for our waffle example. So if 4 friends share 20 waffles, how many waffles does each person get? Well, that would be 20 divided by 4, right? Pretty straightforward. That's going to be 5. Now, if we take a look at that from a keep, change, flip standard, even though these are both happen to be whole numbers, okay, we would take 20 and put it over 1. Division becomes multiplication, and my 4, which would be over 1, gets flipped upside down, which would be 20 times 1/4. And if you remember, we could simplify this right here before we multiply, which would give us 20 divided by 4 would be 5. This would be 1. As we go across here, that's going to give us 5. Or if you think about it, if you didn't simplify, this would be 20/4. 20 divided by 4, again, will be 5. All right. So let's take a look at this. I've got 6 yards of ribbon. I want to make ornaments that use 2 yards each. How many ornaments can I make? Well, that's pretty straightforward. We know, most of us know 6 divided by 2 is going to be 3. That's going to give me 3 equal sections. Let's look at this a different way. Let's say I've got the same 6 yards of ribbon, but I want to make ornaments that use a half a yard each. How many ornaments can I make now? Well, 6 divided by 1/2 equals 12. But let's look at that from a keep, change, flip standpoint, okay? So if I've got 6, I change, this division becomes multiplication, and I change 1/2 into 2 over 1, which equals 12 over 1, which equals 12. And don't worry about if you're confused about why we're flipping that. That's really not important. This is really just meant to be an introduction for you, okay? So when we do the keep, change, flip method, we are keeping the first number, and you notice I put this over 1, so I remember that I'm keeping this as a fraction. Multiplication, flip this one upside down, and then we end up with 12. So we can see that here in visual form here too. Like if I take this same 6 yards and I'm going to use a half a yard each, that's how I'm going to get my 12 pieces. So let's take a look at this one here. We got some pizza this time. How many 8s are there in 3? In 3 whole pizzas, how many 8s are we talking about? Well, you can see it if you look right there. Okay, you're talking about 8, 12, or I'm sorry, 8, my first day with math, 8, 16, 24. All right, so 3 divided by 1/8 equals 24. Well, if we take a look at that from a keep, change, flip perspective, 3 divided by 1/8 equals, again, keeping this, changing this to multiplication from division, and flipping that fraction upside down. That's going to give us 24 over 1 when we multiply out, which means there's going to be 24 eighths, or in this case, 24 delicious slices of pizza. So, again, 24 times 1/8 equals 3. We could put 24 over 1 right here and multiply straight across. We'd have 24 eighths. If we divide that, we get 3. Same thing. All right, your turn. Here are some practice problems. You'll see you've got a whole number, 2 whole numbers there, a whole number, and a fraction, and a whole number and a fraction. Just remember, keep, change, flip, and we'll see you in class.